want to talk about Thomas this morning. I mean, and he's given his name to a character type, hasn't he? Doubting Thomas, a bit like Hooray Henry, or Tricky Dicky, or Contrary Mary. But I think that's a bit unfair, really, because, I mean, as Martin said, the sense is, thank you, right. Yep, keep going. That's wonderful, it's much better. The sense is, as Martin said, twins want to assert their individuality. I'm not just one of two, I am myself. And so perhaps that's a little key to the way that we see Thomas acting. As you saw here, he wasn't with all the others. He acted on his own initiative. We might say it was a daft initiative, but he wasn't there the first time. So perhaps we're thinking of a man who can't be told in some ways. He has to find out for himself. But I also want to just push through a little bit, just question that stereotype that Thomas is a kind of like an icon of our age, like a cool skeptic, someone who will never completely give himself, someone for whom preserving his own identity is the most important thing, and so he finds it difficult to give it. I don't think he's like that. He's not the cool skeptic of the mid-21st century. So I think Thomas's journey from doubting to trusting is really mirrored by all the disciples. We'd read on in Matthew's Gospel, when Jesus appeared to the disciples again, he said, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus has spoken earlier of an unbelieving generation. So I don't think we can say it's only Thomas. Most of us are on that journey from doubting to trusting. And of course, the point of having faith, believing the facts about Jesus, is actually to trust him, to have confidence in him and to trust me. It's about life change. And at the end of our reading, we saw that. So I want us to think about Thomas in particular, and to see in some ways, just through the passages in which he's mentioned in Scripture. There are three passages we're going to look at, this one in John 20, and then a couple more, to see how he, on his journey to clarity about Jesus, especially about the cross. So I think that was the key. So how Thomas comes to some clarity in his own thinking about the cross. Thank you. So, in John's Gospel, John gives pictures, it's like a gallery of snapshots of different people. And a variety of people, right from Nicodemus in chapter 3 to the woman of Samaria, blind man in chapter 9, a variety of people who confess that the Christ, the Son of God, is the man Jesus Christ. And the purpose John has, problem? Okay, not moving? Yeah, sorry. So the last portrait in John's gallery of those who doubt, see, and in some ways, he's the climax. He's the climax. John has left, in some ways, the clearest representative of the people who've passed from doubt to believing almost last. And as someone said, the most unyielding skeptic, probably too strong a word, but that's what it says in the quote, unbelieving skeptic has bequeathed to us the most profound confession. And you remember it's Thomas who says, my Lord and my God. So that's where we're heading, and that's where John's Gospel works. This gallery of people who've come to believe in Jesus. Why? That they might have life in his name. That they might have, basically, they're saying it's worth the struggle. It's worth the journey, because what more can be life? In some ways, life is what we're given. And life is what we are promised. To find life is to find Jesus. So it's worth the struggle. If you feel your journey is slow, if you feel there are many, many questions, it's worth the struggle. And I've just got a picture of Blaise Pascal there, 17th century, I think, scientist, mathematician, engineer, and just reminding us that as this man, a man of reason and a man of faith, he believed God for the evidential reasons. I mean, like the first reason, why is there anything rather than nothing? Why is there something rather than nothing? There's no explanation looking at the world around us. Why did the whole thing start in the first place? And then, why is there a church? How come that there's a church when the person they follow died like a common criminal? Even worse, he died, as we would say today, like a paedophile, a blasphemer. So how on earth has a church survived 2,000 years built on that seemingly weak and self-destructive foundation? So those reasons for faith in the evidence of creation and in history, and he certainly enjoyed those. But there's an amazing thing towards the end of his life. Pascal had this encounter, and he reminded himself on it because he carried in his clothing just a little verse, a little saying, which says, "Fire, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and the scholars. Certainty, heartfelt joy and peace, the God of Jesus Christ." So his faith depends on reason and revelation. Reason and revelation. I see. And again, those are two things we're following with Thomas. There's reason. His doubts are, as it were, pushed aside by further evidence. But there's also revelation, understanding the deep significance of Jesus' words, and particularly of the cross. Thank you, Jordan. Just really to lay the foundation. Belief and doubt are facts of life, aren't they? Some things you're not sure about, but in many ways I think we'd say, as there are very few certainties in life. There are very few certainties in life. Relationships are built on trust, aren't they, rather than proof. Business relationships, even family relationships, are built on as much on trust, which is built up over evidence, of course, but very few certainties in life. And how do people really define faith? Well, the idea that doubt is faith in two minds. Faith hesitating between this and that, as it were, the red and the yellow side. It's in suspense. It's up in the air. Or in the words of Elijah, it's wavering between two opinions, as he said to the Israelites on the mountain. So doubt is not unbelief, but it's that wavering. It could be this, it could be that. It may be this, it may be that. Maybe doubt can be prolonged by the desire to be in control. Perhaps all of us have trust issues. We want to be very sure when we let go of the control of our lives, as it were. And perhaps there's that element there that we've been disappointed. So perhaps all of us have some sense of trust issues, which makes us waver between confessing our faith. So, but I would say doubt is part of faith's journey. It moves people to ask questions. And we'll see that Thomas asked questions. So doubt is a good thing to clarify faith. The most popular book of Christian apologetics in the last 100 years, called Reason for God. And I remember in the first chapter, even like an appeal to unbelievers, and it was, doubt your certainties. I want you to examine the reasons why you don't believe, and just to perhaps consider they may not be as substantial as you think they are. And I'd say Thomas's faith as it emerges is Jesus-centered. He's moving from attraction. You can imagine meeting Jesus and just how attractive he was as a personality. You found yourself, oh, I'd like to see this guy again, to adoration. But his faith is centered on Jesus. The more time he spends with Jesus, the more likely he is to believe. The more he looks at him. And just to say that Jesus responds positively to anyone who says, Lord, I believe, help my doubts. He responds. So just as faith requires patience on the seeker's part, Thomas doesn't rush. It's good not to be impatient, like my first picture there, turning from doubt to trust. You notice, can you just go back to that, Jordan, and again, you see it's a question mark, but it's a posture of prayer. And I believe that anyone who says in their heart, whether they can say it to God or not, I want to know the truth. I want to know the truth. That's my prayer spoken. I want to know the truth. I believe that. I believe it's a prayer inspired by God, actually, but I believe that is the starting point for the person who may have doubts. I want to know. I want to know. Because Thomas, I think, was the kind of person who, when he knew, he was willing to give himself wholehearted. Okay, thank you, Jordan. Let's return. And again, Thomas must learn that Jesus must die a unique death. So here's the first passage. It's John chapter 11, just when they've gone to the tomb of Lazarus. And around the tomb of Lazarus, when they discovered that Lazarus has died and Jesus said, that's where we're going to go, the disciples said, well, you can't go back there, but they tried to stone you the last time you were there. Do you want to walk into an ambush? Do you want to die? But Thomas says, well, it's Jesus. He knows it. Let's go so that we may die with him too. Let's go that we may die with him too. The disciples are against going, but Thomas says, let's go that we may die with him too. So Thomas is loyal. Thomas is brave, our first heading in blue. But I think he misunderstands about Jesus. He misunderstands that Jesus' death is actually a unique one. It's not a question of all the disciples laying down their life like a cult leader and all the followers of the cult, and you find them all dead when you go into their premises. No, Jesus' death is unique. He's going to die alone. Thomas is wholehearted. Living in doubt may be an unwillingness to commit. It may be commitment phobia. Why put all your eggs in one basket? Why do something today when you don't know what may happen tomorrow? Science is always advancing. We may discover more and more and more. There may be a sense of commitment phobia. And a sense of not wanting to be deceived by wishful thinking. No one wants to be made a fool of. In Jesus' time, there were many false messiahs, people claiming to be the Messiah. They'd all seen it. They'd all known them. So perhaps to avoid disappointment, doubt may linger. Because I think in Thomas's mind, he knew that if he committed himself, if it was the Messiah, that was life. That was a commitment which was superior over all other commitments. So he knew that to follow a Messiah put everything else in the shade. So he didn't want to make a false step, to commit himself to something not worthy of that commitment. He must learn that Jesus' death is a unique. He must learn. He'd seen Jesus as a wonder worker. He'd been there at the change of the water into wine. He'd seen him heal the blind. He'd heard his wonderful teaching. But now he had to learn that Jesus was unique. And first, and he was going to die a unique death. You know, where I was a missionary in Africa, they used to say that you could see where the missionaries journeyed from the coast around Mombasa into the inland through the graves of their children. So their progress is marked by the graves of the children. But they kept on going. They didn't turn back if they lost a child. Another story of a couple were invited to a celebration of what their parents had done in the Congo, and a big meeting celebrating the church group that was formed there. And just towards the end, a very old man came forward on his stick, said, I want to tell this story before I die. When those people came with their good news about Jesus. I used to put poison in the family's food, and I saw many of their children die. But they didn't go back when that happened. They kept on in obedience to their message. That's why we became believers. That's why. We saw that example of obedience. We saw that example of sacrifice as the price paid for obedience. And I think that's a little picture. And I think that is beginning to come into Thomas's thinking in the events now going on from John chapter 11 from here. He's going to see now that Jesus' death actually is the reason he came. It's his mission. It's not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's not a terrible, terrible reverse of their plans, but actually it's his victory to be able to go all the way to the cross and obedience. So we speak of the victory of the cross and the victory of the resurrection. So Jesus' fully obedient life leads him to sacrifice. And I think that began to work in Thomas's his consciousness, that Jesus' mission included his death. Thank you. Thomas must learn Jesus' true identity. And here's the next time that Thomas speaks. Jesus says, I'm going to the Father, and you know the way. Well, Thomas very logically says, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Where is the Father? How can we know the way if we don't know what the destination is? And then come Jesus' words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So here we see Thomas honest about his doubts. How can we know? Honest about his what do you mean? Going to the Father, what do you mean? Honesty is the best policy. In most, I won't say in all areas, well, I don't know. I'll get into a debate here. Honesty is the best policy before God. Lord, I find that difficult, but to be honest before God. Thomas said, we don't understand, Lord. What do you mean? Where are you going? And let's remember, again, the context. These are unprecedented events. In the midst is the incarnate Son of God. So just to put that on your map, I know we're very familiar to saying, who is Jesus? And we could get the box tick. Jesus is the Son of God. He came to earth. He came from heaven to... My goodness me. If you were sitting next to that man, if you were breaking bread with whom you were coming to believe, those claims that he was the Son of God, that sort of blows our minds. That means we're in a category of relationship that is unprecedented, that you're sharing space with the creator of the universe. So let's just remind ourselves we are living in this passage in unprecedented situation. The exclusiveness of Christ's salvation is the uniqueness of the divine person. They are dealing with a one-off. And Thomas is going to be persuaded that Jesus is unlike no other. So I think you can say he has a too limited view of Jesus' person. His view is too limited. That's what means he can't understand why Jesus had to die at first. His view was too limited. Jesus alone is the way to the Father. Jesus alone shows the light of God's truth. Jesus is the source of life in his death and resurrection. He is second to none. He is able to do what no one else can. He can show us God. He can give us God's life. He can lead us to God's presence. I was reading about soldiers and in their training and whether this was in the enemy's war. And I got a little sense, my son James, some of you may know, he was in the army. And the way they trained soldiers, I'll say back then, we're talking about the 60s, in some ways it hasn't changed in some areas of the military now. When you signed up, and your first day you came there, these soldiers who were going out to Vietnam, the first thing they did was to strip them naked, have them stand outside for 3 hours. And then in the 60s, worse of anything, they cut their hair off. They took away the idea was that they thought they were some kind of individualists who think they know what's best. We're going to teach you to obey orders and to move as one, not to ask questions, and to go in and to go against everything you've been taught for your whole life. So the making of the soldier in some ways was to take away their sense of distinctiveness, that autonomy which is prized so much these days. Strip bare of their marks of status and appearance. And I think Thomas is running that's in some ways what happened on the cross. On the cross, Jesus became transparent with the holy love of God. He was stripped bare of all those markers of status, probably naked, all those markers of status, all the markers of appearance, barely recognizable, his face contorted with pain and grief, but all those distinctivenesses were gone. As he followed in his obedience, in his love, he showed us the holy, because God is saying sin must be dealt with. Where sin is committed, someone has to pay. You break a relationship, someone's got to pay, someone's got to take the loss, haven't they? There's an insult, words are spoken, someone's got to take the insult, someone's got to take the slander. So sin always involves a payment. So a holy loss. So Jesus shows God's holiness on the cross and God's love. There's a transparency, as if the nature of God can shine through most clearly when Jesus is dying on the cross. And so it's consistent that when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, they said, we've got to kill him now. Otherwise, everyone will go mad over him and start following him. So the leader said, so he signed his death warrant by raising Lazarus, as if to say, actually, my death is what it's all about. Life can come to everybody only through my death. Thank you. Getting towards the end. Thomas wants a personal encounter. So the disciples are there. We've seen the Lord, they tell him. You weren't here, Thomas. You were being a twin and doing your own thing. You weren't here. We've seen the Lord. Thomas wants to know, but I think he wants to be sure that it's the crucified Jesus whom they have seen resurrected. Because for him and for any Jew, a crucified man was a cursed man. A crucified man was a God-forsaken man. A crucified man was the worst form of outsider and failure. So you mean you've seen that person whom I saw killed under the Romans, given over by the religious, that man you've seen? So I think he wants to see that somehow the cross and the resurrection are related. He wants to see that what happened on the cross is vindicated by the resurrection. They're together. Because I think Thomas is conflicted about the cross and the need for Jesus to die for him and the world. Some of the marks on Jesus' body. And it is sort of Thomas here on the right of your picture. Do you see that expression? Expression almost of anguish, isn't it? Anguish, as if to say, is this what you had to do for me? Am I as bad as that? So that eternal stigma of the wounds on the resurrection, that's Thomas's conflict. He's having to deal with that issue. This is outrageous. I need this. And then perhaps in some ways the most difficult thing of all, you love me that much? I mean, that's humbling and some, isn't it? You love me that much? You gave yourself for me that, and somehow how do you live? How do you respond to that kind of love? It's sort of, again, we're breaking the categories. So Thomas is learning. I see what's involved. Here is someone, he's rescuing me, but he's showing such love for me that he wants me to be with him, doubts and all. My ambitions, he wants me that much. So I think it's that kind of sense. Thomas is amazed at what it tells him about himself and what it tells us about Jesus. And then he makes his confession, my Lord and my God. So let's just go to the last picture. So Jesus says to Thomas, put your hand, echoing Thomas's words, showing that Jesus knows all about Thomas. He reminds him that he understood his words. So I think Thomas is provoked to enter into the wounds of the cross. Stop believing, says Jesus, show yourself a believer. Signs are not as solid a foundation for action as faith. So I'm saying that Thomas sees the significance of the wounds, that God's love for him, God's holiness to pay for sin, God's call. So his faith moves into confidence, commitment, and trust. As I said, Jesus wants us to believe him so we're confident in his words and that we trust his promises. It's not just an intellectual faith, it's a personal response. And that's why Thomas can make this personal response, because he's seen through the wounds of Jesus and the resurrected body the truth of Jesus' love for him. Faith is not a thing which we try to screw up. Oh, I must squeeze more faith out of myself. But it's trusting a person. It's looking away from yourself to Christ. The more you look at Christ, the more faith is likely to grow. So faith is not a substance, but faith is what is drawn out of us as we see the love of God in Jesus Christ. Faith and trust comes out of us. And I say it leads to commitment. So Thomas went to India. He preached the risen Christ, planted 7 churches, and there in Chennai, called St. Thomas Cathedral, a memorial to this man who passed from attraction to adoration, from uncertainty, wavering, to faith, to commitment, to confidence, to trust. And it's the basis of our faith. One reason why we can trust the accounts in John's Gospel, they're eyewitnesses. They're historical eyewitnesses. But our faith is based on people like. And from now on, you read, Thomas is always there with the disciples. Wherever they gathered, he's there. On the day of Pentecost, he's there. He's not missing anything out now. He's living out his confession. So what I will say to you, if you struggle, your struggle is worth it. It'll help others down the way, but your struggle is worth it. But I would also say, count it a struggle in the midst of people of faith. As Thomas did, struggle in the midst of people of faith. If you're struggling, struggle in the midst. But your struggle is worth it because you'll come to see more than you thought there was there.